Bugün elimizdeki kaynakları, yani Kuzey Kıbrıs'taki güncel durumu ele alan bir TV programı deşifresini sizin için detaylıca inceledik. Oldukça çarpıcı konular var gerçekten. Gelin şimdi bu yoğun gündemden en öne çıkan, en can alıcı noktalara birlikte bakalım. Amacımız bu bilgileri sizin için damıtmak.
Evet, evet. Kaynaklar gerçekten de Kuzey Kıbrıs'ta hani sadece tekil olaylar değil, birbiriyle bağlantılı görünen ciddi sosyal ve sistemsel yorluklara işaret ediyor. Yani suç oranlarından tutun, sağlık sistemindeki aksaklıklara, siyasi tartışmalardan hayat pahalılığına kadar geniş bir yelpaze var önümüzde. Bazı rakamlar özellikle düşündürücü.
Tam da oradan başlayalım o zaman. Suç oranları. Lefkoşa, Güzelyurt ve Gazi Mausa mahkemelerinden gelen raporlar var elimizde. Bunlar özellikle uyuşturucu, hırsızlık ve şiddet suçlarında ciddi bir tırmanış olduğunu gösteriyor.
Evet.
Lefkoşa'da mesela dava dosyalarının 20 yıl öncesine göre katlandığı söyleniyor. Sadece geçen yıl 331 dosya karara bağlanmış ama yüzlercesi de bir sonraki yıla devretmiş. Üstelik bekleyen 374 ağır ceza dosyası daha varmış sırada. Yani rakamlar pek iç açıcı değil.
Burada mahkeme başkanının bir tespiti var, o önemli bence. Suçlardaki bu artışta diyor, özellikle öğrenci olarak gelip sonrasında kaçak duruma düşen kişilerin oranının yüksekliğine dikkat çekiyor.
Öğrenci olarak gelip kaçak duruma düşenler. Bu ilginç bir detay.
Evet, Leftoşa Merkezi Cezaevi Müdürü'nün verdiği rakamlar da bunu sanki destekliyor. Sadece Lefkoşa bölgesinden 195 hükümlü varmış ve bunların 67'si uyuşturucu, 26'sı cinsel suçlar, 25'i bina açmak gibi ciddi suçlardan içeride. Bu da gösteriyor ki yani mücadele sadece polisiye tedbirlerle olmaz, daha köklü çözümler lazım.
Peki bu durumun neden özellikle öğrenci kimliğiyle gelenlerle bu kadar bağlantılı olduğuna dair bir ipucu veriyor mu kaynaklar? Yani altta yatan sebep ne olabilir acaba? Kontrol mekanizması mı zayıf?
Kaynaklar bu detaya çok derinlemesine girmiyor açıkçası ama mahkeme başkanının bu vurgusu önemli bir sinyal. Dediğiniz gibi belki de ülkeye giriş ve kalış süreçlerindeki denetim boşluklarına işaret ediyor olabilir. Bu durumda bizi ister istemez daha geniş bir denetim ve liyakat sorununa getiriyor ki bunun en trajik, en üzücü yansımalarından biri de maalesef SOS Çocuk Köyü'nde yaşanan o olay oldu.
Evet, maalesef o konuda gündemdeydi. Yani tam da güvenli bir liman olması gereken bir yerde bir çalışanın orada kalan 14 yaşındaki bir kız çocuğuna yönelik cinsel taciz iddiasıyla mahkemeye çıkması korkunç. Şüphelinin bir de savunma olarak alkollü olduğunu öne sürmesi durumu daha da vahimleştiriyor tabii. Bu olay ister istemez devlet kurumlarına, özellikle de böyle hassas kurumlara personel alım süreçlerindeki denetim mekanizmalarını sorgulatıyor.
Kesinlikle, kesinlikle. Kaynakta da tam bu noktaya parmak basılıyor zaten. Liyakat, geçmiş araştırması, referans kontrolü. Bu temel adımlar acaba yeterince titizlikle uygulanıyor mu, uygulanmıyor mu? Bu sorgulanıyor çünkü bu tür olaylar hani bireysel bir hata gibi görünse de aslında sistemin genelindeki zafiyetlerin bir belirtisi olabilir ve toplumdaki o temel güven duygusunu derinden sarsıyor.
Tam da bu güvensizlik ve sorunlar yumağının ortasında meclisin tatile girmesi meselesi var bir de. 91 gün, yani oldukça uzun bir süre. Bu da vatandaşlardan büyük tepki çekmiş. Kaynaklardaki sokak röportajlarında insanlar ülkede bu kadar sorun varken bu kadar uzun tatil olur mu diye soruyorlar. Bir feryat var adeta.
Evet, o tepki çok belirgindi. Siyasilerse anayasanın 81. maddesini gerekçe gösteriyorlar. Tatil süresi anayasayla belirlenmiş diyorlar. Hatta Cumhurbaşkanlığı seçimi nedeniyle bu sürenin 125 güne kadar uzayabileceği bile konuşuluyor.
Yani anayasal bir dayanak var ama
Var ama halkın bu tepkisi aslında biriken sorunların ne kadar acil olduğunu ve genel bir hoşnutsuzluğu çok net ortaya koyuyor. Kaynakta meclis iç tüzüğüyle belki bu sürenin düzenlenebileceğine dair farklı görüşler olduğundan da bahsediliyor ama sonuçta durum bu. Halk çözüm beklerken yasama faaliyetlerinin durması eleştiriliyor haklı olarak. Üstelik sadece bu değil, sağlık sistemiyle ilgili şikayetler de cabası.
Evet, o da vardı. Doktor eksikliği, teşhis sorunları, hastanelerdeki bekleme süreleri.
Tabii, hatta bir dinleyici Bakanın toplantısı yüzünden hastaların saatlerce bekletildiğini anlatıyor kaynakta. Bu tür şeyler de genel bıkkınlığı besliyor tabii.
Bir de işin ekonomik doyutu var. Hayat pahalılığı. Bu da çok konuşulmuş. Türkiye'den gelen bir ürünün, mesela kirazın, burada nasıl 2-3 katı fiyata satıldığı anlatılıyor. Mersin'de 60 ile 300 TL arasında değişirken KKTC'de 500 TL'nin altına düşmüyormuş kiraz. Ya da biber fiyatlarındaki uçurum. Mersin'de 5-5,5 TL arası, burada 250 TL.
İnanılmaz farklar.
Bu durumda ister istemez ambargo söyleminin arkasına mı sığınılıyor sorusunu gündeme getiriyor.
Evet, bu fiyat farkları gerçekten düşündürücü. Kaynak da bunun sadece navlun ve taşıma maliyetleriyle açıklanamayacağını, işin içinde denetimsizlik ve belki de bir tür fırsatçılık olabileceğini ima ediyor gibi.
Yani ambargo bir kalkan mı oluyor bazıları için?
Belki de bu soru beliriyor insanın aklında. Tüm bu parçalar birleştiğinde artan suçlar, kurumsal zafiyetler, siyasi kopukluk, sağlık sorunları, fahiş fiyatlar genel bir yönetim ve sistem sorunu resmi çiziyor sanki.
Evet, kaynaklardan bizim de süzdüğümüz genel izlenim bu yönde oldu açıkçası. Pek çok alanda eş zamanlı yaşanan ciddi problemler var ve bunlara karşı etkili çözüm mekanizmaları ya yetersiz kalıyor ya da işlemiyor gibi görünüyor. Vatandaşın sesindeki o bıkkınlık, yönetime dair güvensizlik de oldukça belirginleşmiş durumda.
Kesinlikle. Tüm bu tabloya böyle bütüncül bakınca insanın aklını kurcalayan asıl soru şu oluyor sanırım. Böylesine köklü ve birbiriyle bu kadar iç içe geçmiş sorunlar yumağı içindeyken gerçek bir değişim, bir iyileşme için ilk anlamlı adım nereden atılmalı, nasıl atılmalı? Yani bu düğümü çözmek için sorumluluk kimde ve o çözüm iradesi nasıl harekete geçirilebilir? İşte bu üzerine gerçekten uzun uzun düşünmeye değer bir nokta.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to cutting through the noise and really understanding what matters. Today we're taking a deep dive into North Cyprus, or the KKCC, that's the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. It's a place often overlooked, maybe, but it's grappling with some really pressing internal challenges. And just to give you a sense, like a real tangible feel for daily life there, let's start with the price tag. Imagine going to the market, right, for cherries. Simple summer fruit. In North Cyprus, 1 kilogram could, well, astonishingly cost you 500 Turkish lira.
Wow, 500.
Yeah. Now, just across the water in Mersin, Turkey, it's not far the same cherries. They range from maybe 60 to 300 lira.
That's a huge difference.
It is often 2, maybe 3 times more expensive for something imported. And, shipping costs alone just can't explain that kind of gap.
No, absolutely not. And that single price point, it's not just about, expensive fruit. It really is a striking symbol of a flawed import system,
Yeah.
an economic setup that puts a huge burden on ordinary people. It shows how even basic market stuff isn't working right. So our mission today is to unpack these core issues. We're talking soaring crime rates, judicial backlogs, political problems, inefficiencies, and the kind of economic gaps you just highlighted.
Exactly. So for you, the listener, this deep dive, it's your crucial shortcut. By the end, you should have a clear, concise grasp of North Cyprus's struggles, and it should get you asking, okay, so what does all this actually mean for daily life there? Let's dive in. Okay, so first up, our sources, particularly these official court reports from places like Lefkoşa, the capital Güzelyurt, and Gazi Mahusa, well, they paint a pretty stark picture. Tragically, they're labeling North Cyprus as rapidly becoming a crime center.
Yeah, the numbers are alarming, the sheer volume of cases. Just 1 year, these 3 courts managed to finalize 577 cases, but hundreds more. They had to be deferred, pushed back, and the reports really stress this dramatic increase, especially, in drug crimes, theft, and violent offenses. These aren't just stats on a page. They really paint a picture of a society under, immense strain.
Right. And if you zoom in on Lefkoşa, the capital, the escalation is just, it's undeniable.
Right.
Cases finished by the courts jumped by over 30% in just 2 decades. And inside the central prison in Lefkoşa, it's a similar story. Out of 195 convicts, get this, over a third are in for drug offenses.
A third? Wow.
Yeah, it highlights a very specific growing crisis. And we also see a significant number, 26 people, locked up for sexual offenses.
And these grim numbers, they really underscore a much bigger systemic issue that our sources point to. The human cost of this rising crime isn't just numbers. It's felt really deeply in some, frankly disturbing incidents. For instance, the sources shared these horrific allegations against a guard at the SOS Children's Village, accused of sexual assault against a 14-year-old girl. Apparently, his defense was that he was under the influence of alcohol.
It's shocking. In that case, though, it connects immediately to this broader critique in the sources about public sector hiring, like a severe lack of proper background checks, maybe fake references being used.
Yeah,
It's a stark contrast to, say, European standards.
definitely.
It really makes you wonder how vulnerable people are protected if basic vetting is so, lax.
And this actually leads us to a critical insight from the court president himself. He identified students who came to the country and became illegal as a major contributor to this rising crime, which suggests, well, a pressing need for more police presence maybe, and what they call a collective fight against crime, something that goes way beyond just the courts.
Right. It prompts the question, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How effective can that fight be if the entry points, the borders aren't really secure? Okay, so moving from the streets to the halls of power, our sources reveal another major frustration for people there: the parliament. It recently started an unprecedented 91-day summer recess. 91 days.
91, that's a long time.
It is. And citizens widely see this as just unacceptable, especially given all the problems the country's facing during what people are calling a critical period.
Yeah, and a really striking point from the sources is this whole constitutional debate around the recess. There's Article 81, Paragraph 3 in the Constitution. It basically says Parliament works from October to the end of June, but there are conflicting legal takes on this. One view from a former High Court president is that only extraordinary sessions are even valid during the recess, so any laws passed might be invalid.
Oh, wow.
But then you have Minister Erhan Araklan saying, well, internal regulations can actually modify this. So it's a fundamental disagreement about the basic rules of how they govern.
Right. But regardless of the legal arguments, the real-world effects are clear, right? Important laws, things about police reform, changes to voting systems,
Yeah.
they were just left hanging. Why? No quorum.
ASAP, yeah.
Nice app, right. Not enough members actually showed up to do business.
And the sources kind of hint at the politics behind it, like some members, maybe from the National Unity Party and others, were possibly deliberately staying away.
To undermine the prime minister, maybe.
That's the suggestion, yeah. Preventing that quorum. Political games, it seems. And it's worth adding, too, that changes to the police force specifically need consultation with military authorities. So that adds another layer of complexity to getting things done.
Right, another hurdle.
It really highlights how tangled up political will and, just bureaucratic process are in the KKTC.
So it's really no wonder then, is it, that the sources are full of this deep frustration, this feeling of abandonment from ordinary citizens. They talk about their politicians living a luxury life. Lucas Hayat, I think the term was.
Lucas Hayat, yeah.
While the nation struggles. You hear things like nothing gets done, they're always on holiday, or even calls for early elections. People are fed up.
The contrast is just so stark. Maybe even starker than those cherry prices we talked about. You hear reports of politicians earning, 385,000 TL a month? With 4 months holiday.
I'm on holiday.
While ordinary workers, retirees, they just can't afford breaks like that. It's a massive disconnect. Makes you wonder if they're living in a different reality sometime.
Or just a very different tax bracket.
Right. Exactly.
But it's clear people are looking for answers, for solutions. The sources also talk about proposals for change, like reducing the number of MPs down to 30. The idea is to save money that could then go to vital things like cancer treatment, support for disabled people, children's villages.
Makes sense.
And there's even a suggestion to make MPs ineligible to be ministers, maybe to promote more stable government, more focus.
Interesting idea. Keep the focus on legislation, perhaps.
Yeah. So beyond these big political issues, that daily life disconnect is just, it's striking. We start with the cherries, right?
Yeah.
500 TL a kilo versus 60 to 300 in Turkey. And you see similar crazy price gaps for other basic things. Apricots, peppers, tomatoes costing way, way more in North Cyprus.
And this leads to some sharp criticism in the sources aimed at local governments, basically, for not making sure people can afford food. Instead, maybe focusing on, distant political things. It does make you question why the immediate needs of citizens seem to fall by the wayside sometimes.
And then there's healthcare. The sources describe the system as almost non-existent, the worst in 20 years.
Ooh.
Apparently, low doctor salaries mean there's a serious shortage of specialists. There's even this anecdote about a health minister holding a meeting that made patients wait outside a hospital for hours. Just imagine.
That's not good.
No. And reports of medicine shortages in pharmacies, too. Though, to be fair, one source did mention a positive experience, highlighting some dedicated healthcare workers.
Well, that's something. But it still raises that fundamental question, right? If basic things like food and healthcare are compromised, how can a society really function, let alone thrive? It speaks to a crumbling infrastructure that goes beyond just health.
Absolutely. The sources point to systemic failures pretty much across the board in public services. Dangerous traffic spots like this Bozaz intersection on the Lefkoshagirn Road are mentioned. Basic safety stuff like traffic lights. Painfully slow to implement.
Infrastructure neglect.
Yeah, and lack of staff in key departments, water, highways.
Yeah.
So broken signs just stay broken. Electricity, frequent power cuts.
And what's also deeply concerning and ties back to safety is the reported lack of X-ray machines at Gurner Harbor. This directly contributes, the sources say, to illegal drugs, weapons, even people getting in. It shows a critical gap in border control and basic security.
Yeah, it's not just one thing failing, is it?
No, the deeper insight here, I think, is that these aren't isolated problems. They're interconnected failures in the sort of fabric of public service.
Okay, let's dig even deeper then. Beyond these daily struggles that you can see, our sources challenge some common narratives, some assumptions maybe, and reveal these more entrenched issues. One that keeps coming up is this idea of an international embargo on North Cyprus.
Ah, yes, the embargo narrative. Well, the sources push back on that pretty directly with concrete examples. They mention foreigners playing football in Iskil, delegations visiting from Mexico, Argentina.
Right.
And they look back, too, remembering big names like Tom Jones and Enrico Macias performing there in the past. And crucially, the direct export of halloumi cheese to America. That's cited as pretty clear evidence against some kind of universal, total embargo.
So it's a real story then.
Well, the profound insight, maybe, is that the real embargoes might actually be self-imposed, stemming from a perceived lack of initiative, maybe, or entrepreneurial spirit within the region itself. That's the suggestion.
It's interesting. Okay, now here's where it gets really fascinating, I think, for the justice system. The sources explain how the Constitution, the one passed quickly back in 1983, apparently to appease a Turkish military regime, well, it's now seriously hindering justice.
How so?
It arbitrarily limits the number of high court judges to just 7 or 8.
Only 7 or 8 for the whole place.
Yeah, and that number can't be increased, even though the population is now apparently nearing 1 million.
Wow. No wonder there are backlogs.
Exactly. It directly leads to severe judicial backlogs. And the sources kind of lament that public understanding wasn't really there to push through constitutional changes that could have fixed this bottleneck.
And
Yeah.
the legal situation sounds complex, too.
It does. The sources say KKTC courts end up applying this weird mix of laws their own. British law, Cyprus Republic law, even Turkish law, basically, because their own legal framework is seen as inadequate.
Right. So the insight there is pretty profound, isn't it? A single clause, maybe hastily drafted decades ago for different reasons, has basically paralyzed the system. It's choking the life out of justice and trust.
Yeah, quite a legacy. And finally, our sources touch on this really sensitive issue: uncontrolled population growth and immigration.
Always a tricky subject.
Definitely. One caller in the source material expresses deep concern about, the rapid growth of certain groups, mentioning Pakistanis specifically, and worrying they might eventually outnumber locals.
And that connects right back to what the court president said earlier, doesn't it? About illegal students being involved in crime.
It does. The sources talk about a perceived urgent need for a quick cleanup, as they put it, of unregistered students and much stricter border controls.
And this is kind of underlined by a recent event mentioned the arrest of a Greek national caught photographing military sites.
Right, connecting that uncontrolled influx to broader security worries.
It really makes you wonder how North Cyprus can manage its borders, its identity, amidst such rapid, seemingly unchecked changes.
So, when you put it all together, what does it all mean? Yeah, we connect the dots, right? These things that seem separate, the crime, the political deadlock, the economic struggles people face daily, the creaking public services, the legal stagnation, they're actually deeply tangled up.
Absolutely.
They paint a really complex, really challenging picture of North Cyprus today.
Indeed they do. It's clearly a society grappling with the fallout from outdated systems, maybe, and this perceived huge gap between its leadership and the everyday realities its citizens are living through. The sources we've looked at today, they really highlight a pressing need for some fundamental reforms and a renewed focus on just effective governance.
So here's a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to chew on, based on everything we've discussed. In a system where core governance, things like justice, public services, are so hampered by old laws and what looks like political apathy. Well, what level of accountability should citizens really demand from their leaders? And maybe more importantly, what's the true cost of inaction on the future stability, the prosperity of that society?